We're still talking about Advent. We're still sitting here in the forge, and tonight we're going to be discussing the Magi, the gifts of the Magi, and the significance behind those gifts. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back into the Forge. We're here for another discussion. I'm Randy. We've got Summer at the table tonight. Gold. I'd like some gold. Frankincense and myrrh. 3 gifts that were given to Jesus by what the Bible refers to as wise men. So who were these wise men? What was the significance? Were there 3 or were there only 3 gifts? We're going to kind of talk about this tonight and delve into the scriptures a little bit. We're going to see what we can uncover and see what insights that we can share with you that we've gleaned from our studies outside of all this. And hopefully, maybe you'll find out some things you didn't know. If not, you'll be confirmed in the things that you've already learned. But we're going to have a great discussion. So I'm glad you're with us. Advent, Christmas.
Yes.
The gifts of the Magi. Do you want to start this, or would you like me to start?
Well, I'll start this.
Okay.
Because it's interesting. You're saying that, we're talking about Advent, we're talking about Christmas, and I am the liturgical calendar nerd here. And so when we talk about the Magi, we actually don't talk about the Magi until January 6th. January 6th is Epiphany. That's the day of Epiphany. And going backwards, you can count down 12 days from December 25th to January 6th. And that's the 12 days of Christmas. So Christmas is more than just one day. It is 12 days going all the way into Epiphany. And so if you are stuck on the calendar kind of like I have been, and I'm trying to get myself out of that routine, you don't want to talk about the Magi until January 6th. But it's a part of the Christmas story. And one of the reasons why I think we do that in the church is the understanding that if you read through the story of Jesus' birth, you'll understand that the Magi didn't come to Mary and Joseph the same night that the shepherds came, that it was sometime later. And I think that's important to remember, that when we're talking about the Nativity, and we see those beautiful pictures of the Nativity, we have shepherds on one side, and on the other side we have wise men. That is the end of the story. That's not exactly what it looked like. That's not exactly how it happened. Just to remember that. But why I think it is important for us to talk about it now is because if we keep putting it off, I think the story of the Magi and who they were and what the gifts meant kind of just gets lost in translation, because not many people are wanting to talk about Christmas come January 6th or anything that happens during the Nativity past January 6th. And so I'm glad we're here talking about this. And it's actually something that I have been intrigued by in the past couple of weeks, is the Magi and these gifts.
And to lay a little groundwork here, what makes this so significant is you have to understand what was going on in that region at this time. And you'll start to better understand when you read the scripture, it'll have a different impact to you when you read it. First off, you need to understand that Jerusalem at that time was a buffer state. Of the Parthian Empire, and the last thing they wanted was some gigantic invasion or some alternate, force coming in. The kingdom was a proxy king was there, basically placed
Herod.
placed there by Rome, and I'm going to read something to you right now from the book of Matthew, chapter 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews?" So you need to understand that they went into this King Herod, who was placed on the throne. Okay, and basically you walked into the person who was sitting on the throne as king and said, "I'm not here to talk to you. I want to talk to the real king. Tish, 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 get away." That was basically an insult. Now, if you have any understanding of kings and power and authority, you don't waltz into the audience of the king and then just insult him by saying, "Get out of our way. We want to see the person with the real power." You don't do that. That's, you lose your head for things like that. And yet, these guys walked in and said that, and Herod basically froze. And we need to understand, number one, why they were there, what drove them to be there, how they were aware that some king had been born, and why Herod didn't respond with some sort of defensive posture or some sort of, decree that, "Hey, about to shut you down." Why did he not do that? And so when you look into this, you have to go back and understand who these wise men were, these Magi, and where their formation was, and how they came to be understanding of some king of Israel, a kingdom that they weren't a part of. They were not Israelites. Okay? And when you study, you're going to find the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, the Babylonian king was having horrific dreams and visions that were troubling him, disturbing him.
Nebuchadnezzar.
He called for his wise men, these Magi at the time, to tell him what the dreams mean. I want to know about these dreams, and I want to know what they mean. I want to know, why am I so disturbed by this? And they couldn't answer him. He basically became so indignant, so angry, he was ready to do away with them all. And this, we call him a young man. We often picture him as like, ruddy young boy or something. He was a man at this time. Daniel, this Israelite who was there basically because Israel had been taken captive, and he said, my God can do that. And then he proved right. Not only did he not even, he wasn't told the details of the dream. He had to tell the king what he dreamed. Then he had to tell him what that meant. And God gave those answers to Daniel. And Daniel told the king, "This is what you dreamed, and this is what it meant." And the king was so impressed by that he put Daniel as the ruler in charge of the Magi. And now you have a person who is versed in Israelite history and prophecy, who is now able to work with other wise men of study. These were the scientists and explorers of their day. You can look at them like that. These educated, the university of that day. And they sat together deciphering these prophecies, looking for the signs that these prophecies mentioned, and fast forward, and we get to this sign of this star that they traveled and they followed. And now they come to Jerusalem, and this is, a vast time difference, hundreds of years in between.
I think it's important to remember that at the time of the exile, when the Greeks and the Persians, Babylon came in and they took everything that was in the temple back with them. They desecrated the temple as it stood. Some of the things that they took from the temple, they put it up as mockery, but they kept other things. And so all these years later, because the book of Daniel spans quite a few years actually of Daniel's life, when Daniel is interpreting dreams and leading the wise men, he had access to such prophets as Isaiah. And we know what is in Isaiah prophesies the coming of the Messiah. Mm-hmm. So that is where we can kind of make the connection there of what they were studying and why they were looking for this Messiah, because they had those prophetic words laid out for them that they were studying for hundreds of years. Because even after Malachi's prophecy, there was 400 years before Christ came. And so for hundreds of years, these Magi were studying and we're watching for the signs. Mm-hmm. We're watching for the star to appear.
And so now, fast forward hundreds of years, and these Magi have carried on this study, this tradition, this search, right? Generation after generation to the next generation of Magi. And now they find this significant find, and they say, we need to go here. We need to go check this out. These guys, the Magi, were basically very powerful. They were the power behind the throne. And we often have the image that there were three. There would have been much more than three. And they would have had lots of provision, and they would have been traveling with lots of security. They would have had probably armed guards with them in quite a number. They would have had provisions for their journey there and their journey back. We know they were carrying gifts to give to this new king should encounter and find him. And so this would have required pack animals and things like that. So this would have been a rather large caravan in reality. This would have not been some three guys just showing up. This probably looked to Herod like, this looks like a possible preemptive liaison, that may precede some sort of invasion. So he's already nervous when they show up. And then when he walks in and they come to speak with him, they basically just say, we're not here to bother with you. We want to find the real king, the one who was born to be king, the ruler of this whole situation here.
And that's where they knew to go, was where Herod was, because that was the kingdom. That's right. That's literally where they thought they would find him. Mm-hmm. But I kind of find that interesting, because in Isaiah, in Micah, it talks about Bethlehem. So they had to go through Herod. Do you think that maybe they did that as a moment of grace, or as an...
as I read this, I interpret this as a formality.
That's
You're the king, and we're here to tell you why we're here, but we're not here for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is just a formality. We're here to see the real king. And then it says that Herod got disturbed by this, and it says, and all of Jerusalem. So inevitably, when I read that Herod was disturbed by this, and all of the Jerusalem and all that was, so the word got out. These guys are here, and this is why they're here. And so things were abuzz. And so they set out to figure out what all this they were talking about. And so they gathered their wise men and historians and stuff together, and they said, they must be talking about Bethlehem. They must be talking about the Messiah. This prophecy of the one to come. And so they set off for Bethlehem.
His star is in the east.
Right. And then we'll skip down here to verse 7. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men and determined from them what time the star appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the young child. When you have found him, bring word to me that I may come and worship him also. And when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them until it came and stood over where the young child was. This, I'm going to deviate slightly. This scripture right here is often misunderstood because people read that and they say, the star which they had seen in the east. It doesn't mean that the star was in the east. They were in the east and they had been traveling west. It means the star that they saw while they were in the east. So I just want to clear that up real quick.
Like the star did not move. The star was always right there over. But think about it when you're traveling. Oftentimes in the mornings, I despise sometimes where I'm driving into work and the sun is always right there in my sight. But as I keep going, the sun does not move, but I do. But it could appear that the sun is moving, right?
Well, to a degree, and you have to realize these are stars. The planet is still moving. The planet is still turning. So the stars would have been appearing to move across the sky.
Exactly.
But they would have still shown directionality. It's that way. Mm-hmm. And they were moving in that direction, and they were traveling. They were from the east, traveling west. And then it says they came to where the young child was. So that now they find him. Okay. And here they opened their gifts, and they presented him. Let me find it here. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. 3 gifts. Now these 3 gifts are often where we get the sort of mental picture that there's 3 wise men. That's why when you see these nativity scenes and stuff around Christmas, you'll see 3 wise men each holding some sort of a wrapped present or something. It's just signifying the gifts. It's not really quantifying the number of magi or the number of people that were traveling with them at all.
We 3 kings from Orient are.
Yeah. And so
they weren't from the Orient.
These 3 gifts are very, very significant. Mm-hmm. The gold speaks to his deity, and honestly his kingship.
Kingship, yes.
The frankincense speaks to his priesthood, his divinity, and the myrrh speaks to his death. And we'll talk about this at a later date in another discussion, but in the book of Revelation, he's actually presented with gifts of gold and frankincense, but no myrrh, because his death now is behind him. It's done. Mm-hmm. So these 3 gifts sort of indicate the ministry that this child was going to be, his purpose here. You know, he was all man, was all God. He is all man and is all God. And it doesn't say here in the scripture how much quantity they gave them. You know, sometimes we have this chest, this little chest of gold, you know, a baby-sized chest. You know, here's the baby. They could have given him more gold that, you know, you could have choked several horses with it. It doesn't say. They could have gave them enough gold that it took 5 guys to get it down and set it in the chest in front of them. What we do infer from the scripture is that we read that the family left and they had to go into Upper Egypt, and this gold financed that. So they were able to travel, and they were able to get the provisions that they needed. They may not have had excess. I'm not saying they rolled down, you know, in limos like some big hotshot, but they had enough provision, enough wealth to get the things that were needed for them to have. And so I would take that to be not necessarily mountains of gold, but I don't think it was just a small couple of coins. The Bible, again, it doesn't specify. Frankincense, that's an interesting thing. Frankincense is sort of like a hardened form of tree sap. And frankincense exudes its fragrance. It emits its fragrance by being crushed, which is also very significant. And frankincense is often, well, it's still used to this very day, as it smells very pleasant. Mm-hmm. And I have met, you know, I was having this, I had this same sort of epiphany about frankincense. I have met people, when you discussed scents, I've met people that say, well, I like the scent of coffee. And I have met people like, well, I'm not really fond of coffee. I don't like the smell of it. Now, most people that I know like the smell of coffee, but there are some that I've met that, no, it's not for me. I don't like it very much.
Yeah.
And everybody, you have a smell, and there'll be some people that go, well, that doesn't bother me. I don't find it that odoriferous. And some say, well, it bothers me. And some are pleased by this and pleased by that. I like the, what's this, the purple flower, jasmine?
Lavender.
Lavender.
Yeah.
Thank you. I actually enjoy the smell of lavender.
Yeah.
My son does not. If we sprayed a lavender scented air freshener in the house, it bothers him no end. He does not like the aroma. But it struck me. I have never in my life met anyone, there may be out there, but I've never met anyone that says, you know what, I don't really care for the smell of frankincense.
I wonder how many people have actually used frankincense. Because if you buy a frankincense essential oil as an essential oil, it's very expensive.
Yes.
It's one of the most expensive ones there are.
And it always has been expensive. Yeah.
Because it's rare and
Yes.
it's a hard process to make it into the oil. Because as you said, it has to be crushed.
Mm-hmm.
And so frankincense is very, very precious, very precious. But you're right. When I think, I love it. I love the smell of frankincense.
It's one of those fragrances that I don't think I know anybody that I know that knows what it smells like. I've never met anyone that says, no, that's so unpleasant, it's horrible. They all enjoy it. And so...
It's interesting because, frankincense, because as you say, it alludes to the priest side of Christ. We got gold for the king, frankincense for him being the priest.
I said frankincense was by crushed.
No, it's myrrh.
It's myrrh that's by crushed. I just made a grievous error. I'm so sorry about that. It's myrrh that releases its fragrance when crushed, not frankincense. But everything else I just said still applies. I've never met anybody that's never smelled frankincense that said I didn't like it.
Yeah, we'll talk about myrrh in a little bit.
Yes, we're coming there.
But no, to get frankincense as an oil, it's a process to get it into the oil. It's very precious. So frankincense used for the priestly side of Christ. They used frankincense as a healing ointment. The priest used it in the temple. Mm-hmm. It was burned as an incense in the temple. And so it also has royal qualities to it, but more for priests. And so I find that interesting as well because talking about gold being kingly royalty, that's a gift that you would give kings. Kings would give kings as a welcoming gift. It makes me wonder when.
Yeah, these were not only when we say it's expensive in our day. It was very expensive during this time. This would have been a gift this is like, I can't believe you got that. I mean, it's like showing up.
Where did you get this?
Yeah, it's like showing up to a small toddler and saying, you know what? Here's a couple of Hummers and a Corvette. It's like, no, that's a very expensive gift.
They knew exactly who the Messiah was.
Yes.
They knew why they were bringing these gifts. These gifts were important for Christ, for Jesus, from the moment he was born till his death and resurrection. Just the symbolism of these gifts told exactly who he is. I think that's very, very interesting. Right.
And then we get to myrrh. And as I said in correction, myrrh is the element that gives off scent by crushing. And myrrh was used in embalming, in preparing bodies for burial. And myrrh is also a scented, fragrant thing.
So why do you think they would bring myrrh? I mean, they brought gold for the king. They brought frankincense for the priest.
Right. Well, myrrh speaks to his sacrifice, to his death.
So
And
you believe that they understood that part also, because that's also written in Isaiah, is the suffering servant.
well, and it's also mentioned of in the Psalms. And I think there may have been some insight here, and which is interesting to me because I can't tell you for certain what was on the mind of these magi with any real authority. Only they knew what they were thinking. Only they knew what they understood. We can postulate. But if, let's just say for discussion's sake, that they deeply understood the significance of the suffering servant, and they knew that there was going to be some sort of death that was going to be involved for this child. If that is the case, they understood far more about the prophecy of this Messiah than even the Israelites did.
Yes.
And I find that one aspect to be quite fascinating, if they in fact did. And I'm not so sure that maybe they didn't. I'm not so sure.
I mean, you're right. We
The Bible does not give us specifics into the insights of the minds of these wise men, these
this
magi.
passage is so small, really.
So anything that we say to that would be postulatory, which is fine. I mean, it's fun to sort of delve in these and kind of work these things out. And we can get some insight by doing that. But I hesitate to say that with any sort of unquestionable authoritative emphasis. So, I wouldn't go that far. But then it says here, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. So, and it doesn't say this in that scripture, but you had to think, at least from my viewpoint, I'm the king. I'm sitting on the throne. I'm the one wielding the power. They came in and then they dissed me. And then when they left, they didn't even bother to tell me they were leaving. You know that had to get under his skin. You know, I mean, because at this point, he's feeling real worried. He's been dissed by these people. And he's like, what's coming next? Are we about to get invaded? Is there about to be a war coming? Am I about to be in the middle of a major conflict? And you know, is Israel about to be squashed on both sides? I mean, this guy was probably shaking in his boots for many reasons. I would say he probably had many sleepless nights at this point.
And to think that he just heard that child king, that there is another who is to be king of Israel, and that's his role. He had to have also felt some fear for treason among the people. And we know history and through the Bible that the Jewish people were oppressed by Rome, and there were many uprisings from the Jewish people themselves rising up and fighting off the Roman powers as best as they could, most of the time, if not all the time, very unsuccessfully. And so that also had to be on his mind. Wait, so these outside wise men from foreign land know of a new king that is coming in. Why don't I know of this? Why haven't I been told this? And is this person are they going to try to get rid of me?
Right. And so it says here now, when they departed, and these wise men, when they left, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt and stay there until I bring you word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. And then it says, when he arose, he took the child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt. And now he had the funding to buy the necessities to make that trip. So all of this, God's in play this whole time. You can see the hand of God at work here. He knows what he's doing. He's got all of this covered. And he was there in Egypt. The family was there in Egypt until the death of Herod. Okay. Then it jumps back down here and we go back to Herod's side of this tale. Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry. Mm-hmm. Boy, he's burning. They got under his skin. He sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all of its districts from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. So he basically said, now, wait a minute. Now, here's another indication, too. The time that he determined from the wise men. From the time that these wise men noticed these signs, set out to travel, and made it to this area was a 2-year period.
Yes.
Again, we talked about, the travel and the region at that time. They would have had to have 2 years worth of provision to make it one way, which means they had a 2-year trek back. Now, it's very possible they could have been stops along the way where they could, get provisions. But the problem is there's no refrigeration. They're not driving refrigerated trucks. So any kind of food and things they had were prone to spoil. They had to have provisions that were, dried and things that would be able to sustain the climate of the time without refrigeration for days of travel before they could, stop someplace and acquire, reprovision. Mm-hmm. So this also indicates that this was probably quite a hefty little travel, and they probably had lots of provision, lots of pack animals and things that they took with them. And then, of course, they were going to have to stop along the way, which means they're going to have tents and places to sleep. You're going to have men to carry all this stuff. You're going to have places for them to sleep. I mean, this is no small endeavor. It's again speaking to the fact that there weren't just 3 guys. And maybe I'm hammering that point home too much. I think we got it, Randy. Enough.
Well, I think it's also interesting because that typically, and I'm guilty of this, talking about Epiphany Sunday, I stop right before I get to the murder of the innocents whenever I teach or preach this, because we don't want to mar the beautiful nativity story, the birth of Christ.
No.
With the sacrifice of so many infants. But I think it needs to be at least mentioned how important that. Why would Herod make that decision? And I mean, it's just right there in Scripture. You read it, and I think you described it beautifully about the whole 2-year period. Why he wanted all newborn babies up into the age of 2. Can't really tell the difference between a boy and a girl baby because they didn't color code or anything like we would nowadays. We have blue or pink. And so the murder of the innocents, that's a horrific moment in history. All because of fear and rage of Herod for this child. And now think about that in the context of Mary and Joseph and these wise magi and these 2 groups that are fleeing now.
Think about that in context of power.
Mm.
An infant that's 2 years or under, you are that threatened by an infant 2 years or under that you slaughter all of them in an entire region.
Yeah.
Think about the massive amount of insecurity that this man felt, and think about the weight of the threat that he interpreted, so.
Did he honestly think he would live forever? Because how could a child under the age of 2 usurp his authority at his age unless he really did feel like he had a divine purpose to be there?
Well, if this was the Messiah, they expected this king that would come in and declare war and set Israel free and do all these things.
Rome would be no more.
Right. Yeah. And set up the end of all things and turn the whole world back to God and all this stuff. and he still has a destiny yet to fulfill.
Yeah. He will do that someday.
And it also, there's prophecies about, the fact that his kingdom would be without end. And so there would never be a Herod, and there would never be a descendant of Herod or anybody else on the throne. And so, yeah, this was a big threat for all them. And then it says here, now when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt again, saying, take the young child and his mother, go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are now dead. And he arose and took the child and his mother and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Which I could understand. He's like, wait a minute, this guy's son, he might have some sort of grudge or vendetta. I don't know if it's wise to go there. And being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside into the region of Galilee. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth. We could say here that he was afraid of this condition here, because this is the son of the same guy that killed all the other infants, and if we hadn't skedaddled, ours would have been part of that. Mm-hmm. And he might have a vendetta if he figures all that out. And you might say that that's a little paranoid. That might be thinking, nobody knew who they were, and blah 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 blah. But then it's confirmed here that he was warned by God in a dream, and God said, "Yeah, you're probably right. You need to." Let's go over here to Galilee. Mm-hmm. And then, so he went to Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, spoken of by the prophets, that he shall be called a Nazarene. It was also prophesied that I called my son out of Egypt. That was one of the prophecies of the Messiah. So we can say that he fits both of those bills now. Yeah. And there's many other scriptural references, prophetic references, and Christ met them all. Mm-hmm. So, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. There's more to the story. I hope you find this discussion insightful. Maybe you learned some things that you didn't know. Maybe you just confirmed some things that you'd heard and thought you knew. Or maybe you know more than we do, and that's great. We'd like to hear from you. And if you have another discussion that you want now, I will admit, for the time period, we're going to be talking about Advent season for at least another episode or two. But we're going to get back to talking about daily Christian topics, or daily topics that we each face, and how do we deal with that from a Christian perspective. And if you have something that you want to discuss, we want to hear from you. So we'd like for you to contact us. You could do so by writing onekingsforge@gmail.com. That's the number 1, kingsforge@gmail.com. You could also contact us by mail or post by writing to the King's Forge, P.O. Box 2590, Shelbyville, Tennessee 37160. And finally, if you're looking for more content, if this is the first time you've heard of us or heard one of our podcasts or anything like that, you want to find out more input or listen to more discussions or whatever, you can do so by going to our website, thekingsforge.org. Hey, we hope that this Advent season right now is truly blessed for you. We hope that you're experiencing God in a whole new way, in a whole new magnitude in this season. And we want to hear you again. So we want you happy. We want you blessed. And we want you back in the forge. Thanks.
Christ's directives to his followers, basically, was to go into all the world and create disciples of all nations. Have you ever wondered, how do we do that effectively? We know what we need to do, but are we doing it in a way that's productive? Are we doing it in a way that's creating the best possible outcomes? I've written a book to explore this topic, and I would appreciate it if you would go to barnesandnoble.com, type in the search bar Christianity Realized, and buy a copy for yourself.